Thank you, Ben. It's great to be back at Google. I was reading one of my favorite books last night, which I always do when I get to interview someone very accomplished and distinguished. It's a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. And there was a passage I reflected on, which I think is very relevant to today. He said, "Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue, and it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself." Steve, what do you think your cause is? Pretty tough, beautiful words.
No, that's very profound. My life has been, I think, it's been a dream. I mean, it's been wonderful. My ambition, and when I was 19, I left home, went to live in Europe for a year, and I decided after spending that year wandering around Europe to wanted to travel for like the rest of my life. I thought this was great to go to new places, new cultures, meet new people, see how things are done differently in other parts of the world.
Was it a kind of escape from you, from your environment, from your home? Did you feel restricted by your upbringing?
I had a great childhood. I was happy. I had friends. It just, once I started traveling, I just realized there was this big world out there that with incredible beauty and architecture and I just wanted to see it all. I wanted to go to the Grand Canyon. I wanted to go to see the Taj Mahal. I wanted to go to China. Wanted to go to Africa and see what's happening there. So it just
so you had this wanderlust from a young age.
Yeah, but I realized that I can't just travel. First of all, I had to make a living, but I needed some purpose. I needed to find a way to do something in addition just to travel. So I went back to school. I sort of fell into a film course at the university, and in studying filmmaking, cinematography, I took a class in still photography. And it was at that point I thought, kind of the light bulb went off, and I thought, this is the way that I could potentially travel, make a living, and sort of, So I basically got a job on a newspaper for a couple of years in 1974, saved my money and got a one-way ticket to India, and basically never looked back. I left in '78, and I've been basically, traveling ever since.
Did you have photographic heroes?
Well, in that first film course I took, there was a big library with tons of photography books. So I started poring over all of these, and I think that one of the great pleasures in life is as a photographer, is going through past work. And the work that really spoke to me in a very, deep way was photographers like, Andre Kertész, Walker Evans, Dorothea Lange, Eugene Smith. But I have to say the one and Elliot Erwitt, of course, has become a friend. But the one photographer who, in a way, was head and shoulders for me above all the other photographers was Henri Cartier-Bresson. What
did he have that the others didn't have as much of?
Well, Henri had he traveled to all these places that I wanted to go to. He had a great sense of composition and shape and his beautiful kind of geometry, great humanity, great stories in his pictures about ordinary life. And it's very difficult. It's easy to, not easy, but it's less, well, to make a great picture in your hometown on the street of just common life is a very difficult thing to do. So he, and then of course he had this great sense of timing and sense the decisive moment, which is a term they use to describe his work. But he kind of had a great eye, great heart, and made just great pictures. And I thought, this is the kind of work that really speaks to me, and this is the kind of photographer I kind of want to emulate.
And when you finally ended up meeting him, how was that first meeting?
Well,
were you intimidated? Were you, oh my God, I'm meeting Rembrandt?
Yeah, I was extremely intimidated because I knew that he could be really tough. I wouldn't say cruel, but he could be a bit rude if he, didn't like the work or he wanted, So I went to see him and his wife Martine, took my book, and I thought, this is either going to be the beginning or the end of my career. And he was very complimentary. It was just the three of us, myself, Martine, and Henri, and he had very kind things to say. We talked about, India, because he had spent a lot of time there. And I have to say that I'm really quite proud to, in your gallery now, you have some of my work on the wall, but you also have a significant amount of Henri's pictures on the wall. And they
seem to complement each other very well.
I don't collect photography by and large, but I have, the first photograph I bought was one of Henri's pictures. And
me too. I mean, that's what got me addicted to photography.
And I wish, this is 20 years ago, I wish I had bought more because it's just, for me, some of the most iconic work in photography.
Why India? You spent so much of your time in your career in India. What keeps bringing you back there?
Well, as I mentioned, I spent a year in Europe. I was in Sweden. I worked in Amsterdam doing kind of odd jobs, traveled around Europe. So when I started my freelance career, I wanted to go somewhere. I had been to Africa on another trip in Latin America, so I thought, okay, where can I really launch this freelance career? So I thought, well, Russia was difficult at that time in the late 70s. China was also a bit difficult to get into. So I thought India's rich, has so many different cultures, religions, geography, and this disparity between extreme rich and poor, between sort of people living in the ultra-modern sense of and people living in a kind of a ancient way, living in villages without electricity and without running water and all that. So I thought, I'll go to India. I'll go for a few weeks and then I'll move to different regions. So that trip, that few-week trip turned into 2 years. I literally stayed in India for 2 years. And I was just like astonished at how incredible this country was. I lived through 2 monsoons. I had, as a 12-year-old boy, as an 11-year-old boy, seen the work of Brian Brake, who had done this incredible essay on the monsoon. So I lived through 2 monsoons. I thought, this is a dramatic moment. I mean,
where do you get your fearlessness from? You go into these extraordinary situations.
Well, I think I've always hated being timid. I always felt that if you really, I remember in the monsoon, the only way, I tried to avoid getting into the water, because the water, there are dead animals and there was all kinds of crap in the water. So I had boots and I tried to work from a boat. And in the end, I decided that if I'm really going to do this story in the best way, I'm going to have to get into that muck and just, So I did that. I spent, days in flooded regions.
Do you do a lot of research before you go to a specific location, or do you just get there and just breathe the moment?
I do a little bit of research. I kind of want to know, in general, the best places to go, the places that are going to interest me the most. But I try not to over-research, because I always find I'm disappointed that I talk about a particular area and I'm looking for something and I get there and it's no longer there. And things change, these guidebooks and whatever. So I've decided maybe it's just better to kind of go cold and just to discover things once you get there. Everything's fresh and new.
I mean, what strikes me the most about looking at your work over all these years is incredible empathy you have for your subject. Do you feel a great responsibility towards the people you're photographing?
Yeah, I've always felt that, we always need to treat people with dignity and respect, and no matter how poor people look, we need to try and, meet them and understand how they're living. And often it's you have to break down that distance between you and them, and you have to try and it's so often photographers, I see students when I'm on workshops, they try and stay at arm's length to the people that they're photographing. And I think you really have to kind of wade in and meet people and joke with people and really spend time, and then I think a whole world opens up. And
so you can't be detached. You can't be.
No, you have to want to really get in and literally meet people, talk to people, walk into a shop or restaurant, sit down or in the neighborhood and talk to people on the street. And even if you don't have a translator and you're there by yourself, you can always just by hand gestures or just by joking around with people. I mean, it's amazing how far you can go with nonverbal communication. A smile, something. It's just you can achieve everything just by a smile and by showing people that you're at their level and that you're not, some arrogant tourist with a big camera and a taxi waiting for you and all that.
Many of your strongest images have children in them. Is that a conscious decision, or are you just attracted to their vulnerability, their emotion?
I love children. I think that they're so, they're so kind of innocent and they're so pure, and that they just give you what there's no veneer. They're just there. And they're just, they're happy or they're sad, and often they're very playful, and I think there's, great. I just think that working with children is so much fun because they're so.
Let's look at an image of a child. This is a pretty famous child.
Yeah.
In your life. How did this come about?
Well, I was. This was at the time when there were about 3 million Afghan refugees living in Pakistan and Iran. So I was doing this story on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and one morning I was wandering through the camp. It was about 11 o'clock. I was almost on the verge of kind of quitting and going back to the hotel and having
lunch. You were frustrated, you didn't see anything?
I wasn't frustrated, but the light was really harsh. I'd already been there for 3 or 4 hours, and I thought, let me take a break, because it was hot and the sun, really bright. 'Cause I don't like to work in really bright light. So, but as I was kind of walking through the camp, I noticed these voices coming from a tent. It was a school, so I kind of wandered over. I thought, maybe I'll check this out before I head out. So there was this girls' school, so I looked in, and the first thing I noticed off in the corner was this little girl with this incredible look and these amazing eyes. So I asked the teacher if I could, come in, photograph, and things. So I had a permit, I had a permission, and she was, told me to come in. But I knew that the main objective was to get a picture of this girl. Everything else,
So it was love at first sight. There was an instant, you saw something really special about this kid and not the other 50 kids
I said, there's an incredible portrait there. So what I did was, I thought, because if I go right to her, she might get too shy and refuse and then it's lost. So I decided to photograph some of the other students to kind of almost to the point where she would feel excluded. So eventually I kind of came around and...
You use child psychology.
I'll tell you exactly, yeah. So I finally came to her, and so this was the first time in her... So she came and sat down in front of my lens.
Never seen a camera, I presume.
Never seen a camera, never met a foreigner, never, and had no idea about photography. I think part of the look is curiosity, maybe wondering like, who am I? Who is this photographer? Why is he dressed in a funny way? And what kind of language is he speaking? And what is this camera and all that? So I took maybe 10 or 15 pictures. And at first she was a bit shy. She had her hands up to her face. And the teacher explained to her, we got to cooperate with this guy because he's telling our story to the world, because our villages have been destroyed and, et cetera, et cetera. So then she dropped her hands, and then I kind of shifted my camera off to the side to get better light on her face, which was natural light coming from outside the tent. And I took, just a few pictures. And as I was in the middle of this, like the most important shoot of my life, she got up and thought, okay, that was fun, that's over.
When you create an image like this that has this universal appeal, acceptance, iconic stature, does it kind of, do you feel you have to live up to create something as great as that every time you start to shoot? Is it a burden as well as a blessing?
I've only ever seen it as positive and completely sort of humbled and grateful that I was able to make this picture, and it's due mostly to her for.
Well, it's due to you perceiving that she had something special and that. That connects with people. Right?
Yeah.
It's one of the most famous photos in 20th century history, isn't it? I mean,
if you say so, yeah.
I think along with D-Day.
But just to if you could go back, I don't know if you can go back. It's one of these cases where everything lined up perfectly. The stars were in complete alignment. The background, the color, the background, her shawl,
right.
The green shawl had a nice complementary color to it. And everything was just perfect. It was just just happened that way, and the light happened to be just right. And
why do you feel everybody connected to it in a way that was pretty unprecedented?
I think it's because she has this. She's very pretty, but there's a look which is very direct, very almost haunted. There's you can tell that she's a bit poor, but that she has this incredible dignity to her, and she's going to power through whatever problem she has. I think even if you don't know that she's a refugee, I still think there's a power to her expression.
Well, you connect to it, and you feel her vulnerability, and it's very humbling. As is this photo. This is probably my favorite photo of yours. How did this come about?
I was on my way to my hotel in Bombay. On the way from the airport, there's probably 50 traffic lights you have to go through to get, and at each traffic light often there's people who come up and ask for money. And this woman came up with her child, and she's looking in to see, what's looking in through this fogged window, and she's looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and I took two, just instinctually took two exposures, and then the light changed, and we kind of sped off. But it's really, it's sort of this two worlds, she's in the traffic and the heat and the rain, and I'm in this sort of air-conditioned bubble, And it's just for that moment we had this sort of connection. But and she, the color works, in terms of the picture. And this little child's looking at me.
What's the saddest situation you've ever found yourself in after all
Well,
these years?
probably working in these refugee camps, whether it was in Lebanon or Kashmir or Sri Lanka or Thailand or Lebanon, Syria. I mean, these are places where these people have lived, maybe had a very happy life. I know in Afghanistan, these people had very large homes in the village and had a really wonderful life. And then they go to these camps and they're suddenly stuck in a tent and crammed together, and they can't, their whole way of life is uprooted and basically has been destroyed. So I think that's, I can't imagine what it would be like to be sort of driven from your home and then have to go live in a foreign country and just live at the mercy of people's charity.
Do you feel you have to emotionally detach yourself at times in order to take the photograph?
You have to, you really, it's hard to do that, but I do think you have to, remind yourself that this is an important story that needs to be, shown to the world. Their story has to get out there. People need to be informed about what's going on in our world, like Syria, for instance. And without people that tell that story, that these people are voiceless. So I think that has to be more important than
whatever you're particularly feeling at that moment.
Exactly, that's right, yeah. So, I think that's the toughest.
This seems a happy situation for you. Was it?
Yeah, as a kind of a wandering street photographer, often you come around a corner and you see a composition, and photographers have been doing this for the last 100 years. But you recognize that as people are coming and going from this composition, that that the person or an animal or whatever that comes through kind of completes the picture. So in this case, it just so happened that in India, after this festival called Holi, I don't know, somebody put all these handprints on the wall, and this was a very well-traveled alleyway, and there were people coming and going. There were vendors, there were cows, and there were a lot of. So I just stood there and I was photographing people coming into my frame,
Right.
and people going out of my frame. And I stood there for, I don't know, maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half, maybe more, and then went back at night and started looking through my pictures, and decided that I think this has great potential. So I went back again the next day and spent another bit of time. But I just, again, the colors and that edge of the kind of ochre, and that, I thought it was a great moment.
In everything you photographed, did you feel the human spirit is essentially good or bad?
I think it's, I think it's basically good. There's a lot of, evil forces and bad actors out there. But I think that basically meet people on the street, and people are generally kind and hospitable and willing to be photographed. I've always, wherever I've gone in the world, 9, 10 times out of 10, if you approach people with a smile, and people are more than happy to agree to have their portrait taken.
Has there ever been a situation where you just couldn't take the photograph because what you were in front of was so emotionally disturbing?
That only happened one time.
Where was that?
That was in on the banks of the Ganges, and it's very common for people to be cremated, and sometimes they can't afford to be cremated. They just throw their bodies into the river, and there were some dogs, kind of. So I thought, whoa, that's like that's like, I can't even look at that, let alone photograph it. So I kind of walked away from that. But I think that I think it's better to, again, treating people with always being respectful. I think you need to take make the picture and then decide afterward whether you should pass it along and print it or publish it or whatever. But I always am very respectful of people's, if there's a funeral, if there's a death or whatever, I think you have to be really, really careful and not overstep that line where you...
it might be in bad taste, as we say in the first world.
Yeah, bad taste. And then you don't want... I mean, people may have just... this may be the most tragic moment of their life, and you just have to be very respectful of that and evaluate moment to moment. Is this the right thing to do? Should I make this picture? Do they, sometimes they want you to photograph them because they want that story told. But sometimes they don't, so you just have to be able to read that situation.
So you're always walking a moral line.
Every moment. One moment it could be the right thing to do, and then things shift, and you have to kind of, adjust. So you're always, your internal, computer is always kind of readjusting and recalibrating.
Another magical image. How did this come about?
Well, as I was saying, I was really inspired by Brian Brake because the monsoon was such a dramatic weather event. It was either too much rain and you had floods or not enough and you had drought. And people living in these agricultural countries really depend on the rain. It's no joke. So I went to India weeks before the onset of the rain because I wanted to get the buildup of the heat, the dust, the hot wind, which is the kind of the prelude to the monsoon. And so I was driving to the desert, going between, I think, Jodhpur and Jaisalmer, and this enormous dust storm came up out of nowhere. And my first inclination was to roll the windows up of the car and try and, hunker down, so I didn't want to get my cameras dusted. Then I realized, wait a minute, I'm actually supposed to be, shooting on this thing. So then I started looking around for something to photograph some people, and then I was getting desperate. I saw these women who had been working huddled together.
What were they working at? What were they
doing? During the dry season, just before the monsoon, the government has these programs where they employ, thousands of villagers to work on the road or dig.
It's like a WPA project.
Yeah. So they were getting, they were doing this work, and they huddled together. I guess just because it was windy and dusty, and I literally made, I ran across the field. I made a few pictures, and then the wind stopped, and they went back to work, and it was over. So you have to be, you can't hesitate. You have to seize the moment. Oh,
I have to thank you because you turned me on to color photography.
Oh.
I was a terrible black and white snob before I met you, and
yeah.
And you just can't conceive of these images we've been looking at in black and white. They just wouldn't have the power and the luminosity and the impact.
Mm.
So I thank you for turning me on to color.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
Well, actually the world's, I always felt it was more logical to photograph in color because the world is in color, and so much of the story, if you go to a Tibetan monastery or Hindu temple, a lot of the cultural, it's so much cultural information in color, so it makes more sense for me to photograph the world in color. So I was in Burma on the west coast. There was this ship that had run aground. So you had this really kind of surreal situation where these children are playing with a ball. There's this ship that's sort of run aground, and it was actually really heavy rain when I took this picture. But you can't see the rain because it's, you need a dark background to see the water. But I just thought it was these children kind of floating out there in this very, the surf was only a couple inches deep, and they're playing there, having a great time during the monsoon, and not a care in the world. Looked like so much fun.
Would you say it's a happy photo for you?
Yeah, I like dark, moody pictures. I've always been attracted more to the, for color, I think when it's, the color's muted, dark, kind of more low contrast, for me it works better than bright sun. I never work in the bright sun. Yeah, I'm actually very proud of this picture, that it's, this picture no longer exists. There's no more steam locomotives in India.
What are they now? All diesel trains?
They're all, I guess, diesel or electric or whatever. And that particular track has been ripped up and it's gone. So although there's the railroad yard still exists there, and there are trains that go back and forth many times a day, that particular track is gone, and the steam engines are gone. But this juxtaposition between the Taj Mahal and the train, I thought was great. I spent some time with Paul Theroux, the great travel writer, just great writer in general, and we did this journey from the Khyber Pass through Pakistan, India, and into Bangladesh.
Did he suggest images along the way as you were chatting, or through your conversations? Did that spark a direction to go in?
I never need a writer to suggest images for me.
Right. You're self-generating.
But I have to say I was inspired to do this story based on his book,
Right.
The Great Railway Bazaar, which I had read when I was in bed with dysentery, getting rabies shots at the same time. I was like, delirious. But that book was so delightful and such a great read that and then later, 5 years later, meeting him and then recreating this particular leg of the journey, I thought was great fun.
Which movies have inspired you?
Well, I think Sunset Boulevard, I see that over and over again, and it was filmed right here in Los Angeles. But all the work of Kubrick, of course I always loved Charlie Chaplin's movies, Goodfellas,
A little bit of violence thrown in.
Yeah, I'm a big, I take all of my own movies on the plane, on my iPad, and
So that's how you relax.
That's how I relax, absolutely, yeah.
And other great books you've read?
The Coen brothers, they had the Oh Caesar just came out, and Oh Brother, their movies are just, I read a book recently by Fawn Brodie on the life and times of Sir Richard Francis Burton, who was kind of a 19th century British explorer who spoke like 25 languages, and he spent...
Do you identify with that kind of travel lust?
Yeah, no, he lived in another time and did it in a much more grand way, but he lived in India, he lived in Syria, South America, he traveled to the U.S. He spoke all these languages flawlessly, Arabic, Hindi, plus all the European languages, but an incredible, tried to find the source of the Nile. So he had an incredible, I mean, that kind of adventure now no longer exists, because you can, I think now we get upset when you travel. I mean, he was actually walking from Zanzibar close to Lake Victoria.
What do you think drove him on to do that against all those odds?
I think he was crazy. I think he was.
You think you're a bit crazy
Yeah,
to put yourself
absolutely.
in these situations? Of,
You think, I'm still a young man, but why would you go to crawl through the muck in now at
next week.
when I don't have to? I could.
So what's the answer?
I could go live on a beach and
You're a very
smoke
successful guy. You
smoke a
could,
big cigar.
as we were talking in the car coming over, you could retire, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, what keeps you driving? What is it?
I think it's simply loving what you do. I get great pleasure and great fulfillment out of making pictures of, the whole process of, walking down the street and discovering things, and it is a great pleasure. And I think that I can never imagine just retiring and to do what? I mean, retire from what you love. I mean, can you imagine Picasso saying, well, I think I've painted enough pictures. I want to just go, relax now. I think, this is what kind of energizes me and what gives, great purpose to my life. And I still have, I'm still excited about going to new places and going back to old places. I've been to Italy, I'm going back to Italy in about a week.
Do you think you're getting better at this?
Well, I think you always have to, I think you have to believe that,
Otherwise you can't get out of bed.
No, but I think that as you perfect your craft, how you see light, how you've seen, I photographed for 40 plus years, and I've kind of photographed, not everything, but I kind of feel like I've photographed everything. And I think you want to photograph things in new ways. And I think once then you're starting to do better work because you've kind of run through all the cliches, now you're trying to maybe up your game a bit.
Yeah.
So I think I'm doing as good a work or better. I think digital photography actually
Makes it easier?
Make a big improvement because I've always gravitated towards low light, dark corners, and with digital you can really work in that low light. Whereas with film, it was impossible. So often, I remember you're in a really dark situation and you're shooting and I think this is a great picture, really happy. You get home a month later and realize, all the pictures are back focused. You thought you were in focus, but in fact, you missed the focus. But with digital, at some point you can kind of check, because if it's dark, and so you can check and say, oh my God, I'm not in focus. I better.
Are there any drawbacks to shooting in digital? Is there anything you miss about the analog life you had?
Yeah, I think the only tricky part is the storage and having to have multiple backups, because you put your pictures on a hard drive, it goes in the drawer, you come back to it 5, 10, 15 years later, and maybe the hard drive is degraded, maybe it's something happened to it, maybe you can't read it any longer because you don't have the right chords. I mean, there's all sorts of things. So you have to be really careful that your work is backed up, and that if you're not, we have a great system in multiple locations just for that very reason.
As a man of the world, what's your biggest fear for the future of humanity?
I think we're on the right track. I'm just not sure we're going to get there soon enough. I think when you think of the environment, do people? I think let's ask that question of the elephants and the tigers. I mean, what do they think about the state of the world right now? I think they would be like, my God, world's coming to an end. So I think that there's been, we know that, like in the case of wildlife, they're imperiled and it's a dire situation. And I think more people care today about that, or climate change, or the oceans, or whatever. Just a question: are we going to move fast enough to actually make a difference, or to save the planet? We all hope so, but I think it's not a done deal.
Well, we're being hosted by one of the great technology companies in the world. If you could have one wish, what would you wish that a company like this could do now?
Well, I think that the
With
more
all that you've seen.
I think the more people are connected, and the more they have access to information, education, healthcare. I think that this will be when people have that information, their lives will be better, and I think people will tend to be more come together, hopefully, and respect each other's cultures. I mean, I think that's important.
So we're hopeful, even though we turn on the television and we look at what's going on now.
Yeah, there's a lot of
negative
reason to be
despair.
Yeah, but I think we got to power through, and we have to. There's no option. We can't. We got to move forward.
Well, you've given us a lot of hope, and your images connect us. I'm sure maybe it's a good time to ask some questions.
Everybody has to ask one question. We're going to go around the room.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming. I really admire your work a lot, and I'm just so grateful you're here. So I had a question, one about related to shooting style, or like your approach to shooting. So, like, I know with Bresson, I think what he would do is he would set his focus in advance and his exposure, and he'd walk around without even like looking through the viewfinder sometimes, and just wait for everything to come together and then shoot at the decisive moment. How much are you looking for shots that you take that look unplanned or unposed? How many of those are you shooting without looking through the viewfinder and just like waiting for a moment, or it just comes up to you, like the people coming up to the cab? It looked like maybe you weren't even looking through the viewfinder, you just had the camera here and shot it, or were you like looking through the viewfinder?
Yeah, no, I always looked through the viewfinder. He had an uncanny ability to make really good pictures, holding this camera up. But the advantage, we have now over shooting in photographing in the 40s or the 50s or whatever, is that we have autofocus now. We can work at a much higher ISO, so that where he may have been at 200 or 100, I can shoot at 1,000 or 2,000. So we can get sort of much sharper pictures. But I think that I don't do so well when I don't look through the viewfinder. I need to see the picture.
And have you ever written about your experiences in India when you were there, like those first couple of years?
There may be something in this.
There's a lot of great information about Steve's process in this wonderful book called Untold. Should we hold it up? I will hold it. Thank you so much for loaning this. I think this is a great insight into what it takes to be a great photographer. And I think this is probably the first time you articulated many of the things that you said today in print. So if you want to know more what it takes to be a great photographer, I would recommend this book, Untold, Steve McCurry.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
There was a story a few years ago where a team from National Geographic went back to Afghanistan or Pakistan to find the girl in the photo, and I believe they found her in a village. Were you part of that team, and did you talk with her, or what was your experience going back to her, see her 20 years later or whatever it was?
Yeah, I was part of that documentary. We had gotten thousands of letters over the years, people wanting to know, where is she? How can we help her? Is she still alive? They wanted to send her money or whatever. Men wanted to marry her. It was incredible. So there were, just after 9/11, when people started to learn about Afghanistan, we decided to go and try and find her. And we had no idea where she was. We know her name. So I thought, well, let's go back to the refugee camp where I had photographed her. And I just knew there was no way we were ever going to locate her. But we got very lucky. After a few days, we found the teacher who had been in the classroom that day. And then another week went by, somebody came up and said, I know where her brother lives. So, and then we thought, well, that's, that's, could be they wanted money and all that. I thought, okay, that's just the story. But lo and behold, he actually found the brother. And of course, once we found the brother, we were able to find
And
her.
how long did it take you to find her again?
About 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
About 2 weeks.
And there were times when you wanted to give up. You thought this is
Yeah.
futile.
Oh, there were
What
so
am I
many.
doing?
There were so many, people who were pretending to be her
Right.
and saying, "Oh, it's great to see you again."
Like fake Elvises,
Yeah.
Somebody wants-
And they would swear up and down that they were the girl and that they remembered everything. And there was one who everybody was convinced, even the filmmaker he got on the phone and was calling all these eye doctors around the world saying, is it possible that her eyes could go from the way they were in the picture to brown?
Wow.
He's waking up doctors in the middle of the night. One of the doctors said, well, it's possible there could be a shift, blah, blah. And they took that and just ran with it, they
Wow.
thought, for sure. So we went down the road really far with her in terms of interviewing her and all that. But
Must have been pretty emotional.
it was,
For both of you.
well, when we actually met her and she walked through the door, I was literally expecting, in my, kind of half thinking that it was going to be the same little girl walking through the door.
Time had stopped.
Yeah. And, this is 17 years later. Now she's a grown woman. She's a mother. She's married. And she was dressed in black. It was a kind of rather dark room. And this kind of figure walked in. I thought, whoa. I wasn't expecting that. But she was, healthy. And as I said, she had a family. And we quickly, within, same day, we started talking about, how can we help you? What can we do to make your life better? And but in that culture, to be able to meet her, photograph her, is a complete impossibility because of a woman's not supposed to be seen
Right.
by somebody outside of their family.
So how did you negotiate your way around it?
Well, we had a great translator who happened to be a very respected journalist. We had his help. Her husband, we had to get permission from the husband, agreed to let us meet her. And I think they trusted us. I think they felt that this was going to be a good thing for them. And I was able to photograph her, which is like never happens. So it was a kind of a great story to.
And was she aware of the impact that the original photo had on the world?
Well, she is illiterate, so she wasn't aware. She didn't get magazines or newspapers, and had no idea that her picture was famous, had been published all over the world, and she didn't know that. She thought that, well, there's that one copy. But then we explained, and then when the documentary came out, we made sure she had access to a television so she could see, because the story that ran all over the world. And so since then, we've been continuing to be in touch with her and help her in all possible ways.
I have a question kind of more about your current projects. I know, there's a lot of tumultuous situations around the world, the Syrian refugee crisis, for example. What are you currently working on? Are you involved in that at all, and kind of just more interested in what you're currently doing?
Well, my work has really shifted away from magazines, and I'm doing more sort of personal projects. At this point in my life, I want to do exactly what I want to do. I don't want to, have fun and do things that I think are interesting.
Come here and talk and spread
Exactly.
the word.
Yeah, exactly. So, I kind of feel like I think it's important to evolve and grow and do different things in your life. So now I'm interested in books, exhibitions, working with Peter in the gallery. And I want to go places, and I have a book coming out in a few weeks on people reading around the world. It's an interesting little book. I just have a book on India that came out. And I want to have other projects I want to do. And I just want to go to places and be involved with situations and my nonprofit, helping children in Afghanistan. So this is how I want to spend. I want to, just do exactly what I think is the most important thing for me right now.
Well, you deserve it. So.
Thank you.
If there was one word to describe you, or somebody else describing you, what would that word be? Apart from crazy.
Energetic, passionate. Yes, ma'am.
So I love your work, and as an Indian who spent all of 6 years in India, I sort of live vicariously through your pictures. So I had a question. I go back to that part of the world every few years, and it changes every time I'm back. And you mentioned something about the fact that you photograph something, then you come back to it and it changes. So have you ever felt in going back that it's changed in some way?
Yeah.
And what are your sort of thoughts on how it's changed and transformed through the years?
Right. Yeah. By the way, I my book on India is purely my point of view, and it's I never in my book I'm not really trying to tell the story of India. It's more like a diary, my personal impressions. This India's a vast country with so much going on. My book is more just personal impressions, little moments in time, and it's nothing more than that. I'm not trying to say, this is India. That's impossible to do in one book. But India, when I first arrived in '78, was, there was no internet, making phone calls, there was no cell phones. To book a call back home would take sometimes, hours and hours. Sometimes they never went through. I shipped film back by the post. Now you can send them through the, wirelessly, there was FedEx for a while. But there was a time when I would send my film literally back, mail it back. But with all the internet and whatnot, people in India now have access to all the information. I used to walk through a village, and children used to follow me because I was like a novelty, had a camera, and was this foreigner. And now children, they've seen it all, and they're not fascinated with a foreigner with a camera because they've seen better on their video games or whatever. So back when I first went to India, the cars on the street were mostly, there were 2 or 3 mostly made in India. Now they have all the cars, Mercedes. I mean, you've got everything.
Could you still take this photo today?
This one from Calcutta?
Has it changed that much?
That's still pretty much the way it is. I love Calcutta. It's one of the most, if somebody said, here's a blank check, go to a city in the world and do a book or an exhibition, I'd go to Calcutta.
Because?
So rich. First of all, there's great art, and the arts in Bengal, West Bengal and Calcutta are very rich. Filmmaking, photography. They have great festivals there, great spirit. And there's this vibrancy on the street, which is like unmatched, I think, any place in the world. So I'm a big fan of Calcutta. This was a street scene there that it was just, incredible. But so India's really now, back when I first went there was a limited amount of access to certain products from, so now everything's available. And all the tech companies are there, the automobile companies are there, and they're really taking over the world,
I have another question.
Hi, thank you for being here. Having the opportunity to travel the world, you've seen multiple humanitarian issues, and I appreciate you sharing them with the world and being able to have that action impact that way. But I'm just wondering, what causes and humanitarian issues do you take away as being most important to you, and do you that you're actively focusing on? Or I know that you mentioned having a nonprofit. Can you tell me a little bit more about those efforts there?
Yeah, we're what we're doing now. In the past we've sent textbooks to Bamiyan province and supported teachers and whatnot. And now we've kind of shifted. My sister is very active in this. We're actually organizing cameras and photography classes for young Afghan girls, give them a chance to have a different kind of experience, have a creative outlet, photograph their friends, family, their community, and to just have this sort of a artistic endeavor. So that's where we're at with that, and we're in Bamiyan province, in Kabul, and in Herat. And there's some of the pictures are really wonderful that these young girls are making. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Any more questions?
Hi. I guess a related follow-up question would be, have you ever found yourself in certain situations where there was a humanitarian crisis and it was really difficult for you personally to keep your journalistic distance from the subject? I'm sure you've been approached a lot, with the women in that photo to ask for money, and how do you negotiate those conversations? And I was just wondering if you could speak more to that.
Yeah, that got very, when I was in Cambodia, when there was hundreds of thousands of Cambodians flooding into Thailand, things were a bit tense. And they would come up to us or to me and say, can you help? One guy came up to me and said, I have some gold. Can you take it back into Thailand and exchange it for money? And they were really desperate, and you do the best you can. I took the gold and I changed it and all that, but it's you try and help in any way you can. But I would say that in my experience, by the time I get to these places, the Red Cross and UNHCR and a lot of the relief agencies are already there, and everything's pretty much set up. So in my experience, by the time I show up, everything's pretty much already kind of organized. But still, there's always, you can help in small ways.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Google, for... Oh, you have a question.
Thank you for coming. And you started your talk about, you mentioned some fine lines when you take a picture, or sometimes you decide not to take it, step away, when you decide to publish it or not to publish, to post-process and how much to post-process. In your 40 plus years experience, do those lines change? Do you regret today not taking certain pictures, or the opposite, maybe you publish certain pictures that you today wouldn't? How much it changed, if anything? And maybe related question is, do you have any unpublished pictures, and why? Why wouldn't you publish if they do?
I have hundreds of thousands of unpublished pictures. I would be delighted to publish those pictures. Some pictures are better than others. No, I think that we all have unpublished pictures, and maybe some unpublished pictures are better unseen, right. Because you want pictures to come up to a certain.
Do you think you're the best judge of what is your?
No, I don't think. I think that I know you mentioned a picture by McCurry-Bresson, which had kind of gone unnoticed largely, and you saw it, liked it, and asked to have a print made. And it's a wonderful, beautiful picture. I think it's incredible. It's in your gallery. I think that there's a reason why. I mean, I think you want your best work published, and I can't think of a situation where I took pictures which I regretted or got published and regretted. And I can't really think of many. There is one instance that comes to mind where in Bangladesh, I think it was during the War of Independence, there was some photographers who were there, and there were these soldiers that were maybe encouraged by the press. And there's this famous picture won a Pulitzer Prize, which the soldiers bayoneting this poor person probably to death. And maybe if the press had walked away, maybe that person would have. But in the heat of the moment, I mean, things happen. This is a long. Generally, I think I would say most of my colleagues, they are compassionate people and want to do the right thing. So there's always something that goes kind of sideways, but I think in general things either do the right thing. So I don't have any situations like that I regret taking.
Well, hopefully, maybe we'll get invited back by Google, and we can have Steve McCurry, the unseen photos, and you'll be the first people in the world to see them.
Yeah.
But thank you all for coming. Thank you, Benjamin, for hosting us. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.